Okay, hello everybody. Good morning in Mexico and good afternoon for us here in Europe. It's for me a great pleasure to welcome you to our seminar Night Studies, Études sur la nuit, Estudios sobre la noche, co-organized with the Centro de Investigaciones sobre América del Norte, de la UNAM in Mexico, with the Center for Interdisciplinary Research on Montréal, University of McGill, and for the Institut des Amériques, Institut de Géoarchitecture in Brittany in France. This session was organized by Yolanda Macias, a PhD student at CISAN, and myself, as we consider that a gendered approach to night studies is a priority. So we thank Emily and Sarah again for having accepted our invitation. And now I let Yolanda introduce our speakers in detail, and we can start with this presentation. Thank you, Yolanda.
Thank you, Edna. So Dr. Emily Nichols is a senior lecturer in sociology at the University of Portsmouth, UK. Her PhD thesis explores young women's negotiations of gender and femininity on a girls' night out, and she has published a book based on this research with Palgrave Macmillan titled Negotiating Femininities in the Neoliberal Nighttime Economy, Too Much of a Girl. More recently, she has conducted research on women's experiences of early sobriety and the experiences of UK drinkers during lockdown and the COVID-19 pandemic. She is currently undertaking research funded by the Institute of Alcohol Studies into the gendered marketing and consumption of alcohol-free beer and spirits. The title of her presentation is I Don't Like to Feel Out of Control, Young Women's Negotiations of Risk, Safekeeping, and Femininity in the Nighttime Economy. Sara Ortiz Escalante is a feminist activist and urban planner. Sara received a PhD in planning by the University of British Columbia with the dissertation Planning the Everyday/Every Night, a feminist participatory action research with women night shift workers. Sara is a member of Colectivo Poncis, a group of sociologists, planners, and architects based in Barcelona, working applying an intersectional feminist perspective in urban planning. Based in Barcelona, Colectivo Poncis has more than 15 years of experience working nationally and internationally. They develop urban planning and architecture projects, participatory processes, capacity building, teaching, and research. In November of 2019, they published Urbanismo Feminista por una transformación radical de los espacios de vida with Virus Editorial. They have published multiple materials and guides to apply a feminist perspective in different aspects of design and planning. The title of her presentation is Nocturnas, Women Night Shift Workers Planning the Everyday/Every Night City. So the presentations will be around 20 minutes each, and then we'll have time for Q&A in whatever language we feel more comfortable, and we will do our best to translate. Okay, thank you, Emily.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Yolanda and Edna, and for such a generous invitation and such a warm welcome. It's really nice to be here today. And as I was saying, to have a bit of a break away from thinking about teaching, to be able to talk about research. So it's a real pleasure. I'll just share my screen, and hopefully you should all be able to see my slides, but please give me a shout if you can't. Just to start by saying, actually, funnily enough, the kind of focus of the presentation has changed a little bit since I sent the abstract. So actually, the idea of control, while I'll touch on it, isn't perhaps as central as I thought it might be when I submitted the title. So what I'd like to talk about today is some data from my PhD, looking at the Girls' Night Out, to really think about the ways in which women negotiate risk, pleasure, and gender through this quite specific and unique mode of engagement with the nighttime economy. So I don't know if the Girls' Night Out translates internationally, but certainly within the UK, the idea of a group of girlfriends going out together, typically in mainstream spaces within the nighttime economy, with the idea of getting ready together and drinking together as quite a central component to the specific form of the night out. So very much about getting ready with a group of female friends and going out clubbing together with that group of female female friends. So what's quite interesting is the girls' night out actually remains relatively underexplored in the academic literature, even though I think it presents a really nice opportunity for us to think about the ways in which women negotiate femininity in contemporary leisure spaces. So just to give an overview of the structure of the presentation, as night studies scholars, you'll all be fairly familiar with the concept of the nighttime economy, but just to kind of contextualize what I'm talking about today, thinking about gender, risk, and the nighttime economy. Then I'll introduce the project itself, the Girls' Night Out project. And then really my discussion is going to center around tensions that young women experience in trying to negotiate feminine and gendered identities within the nighttime economy. So thinking about this idea of girl time and the girls' night out as a form of pleasure, escapism, and a chance to do femininity in particular ways. But then thinking on the flip side of that about this idea of not overstepping the mark and not going too far, and the need that young women experience to manage risk and keep themselves safe in the nighttime economy. So just to start by thinking a little bit about the background of the nighttime economy. So certainly in the UK, this historic idea of public drinking as a masculinized pastime, the idea of the consumption of beer and the pub or the working man's club, certainly in the UK at least, as a masculine kind of space. And as we've moved through to the development of a contemporary nighttime economy, consisting of kind of bars, pubs and clubs concentrated in urban spaces in the city centre, we have, some argued, seen a feminization of the nighttime economy, an attempt for the nighttime economy to reach out and target women, particularly young women, as a distinct consumer market. And what we've seen alongside this is increasing alcohol consumption for women, and research, including some of my own, exploring the role of drinking in doing femininities and friendships. And we do know for sure that going out is a central leisure activity for many young people, and that going out, drinking, spending time with friends is likely to be an important part of young women's lives. Indeed, we know from some previous research that's been carried out that nights out are positioned as offering women opportunities to relax, to socialize with friends, and interestingly, to escape from the kind of mundane realities of their everyday lives of work and domestic responsibilities. Building on this then, some theorists have argued that we can think about the nighttime economy as a space in which women can actually challenge expectations around femininities, thinking of the nighttime economy as spaces that can be empowering and pleasurable for young women, and where they can shake off or reject certain ideas about what it means to be feminine or what it means to be ladylike. And this links, of course, into wider conceptualizations of the nighttime economy. This idea that the nighttime economy is what we might call a liminal space, a kind of in-between space where we're expected to pursue pleasure, escape, and excitement. So Hayward and Hobbs have, and others have described the nighttime economy as a site of pleasures and dangers, where the participants are required to negotiate the thrills, the excitements, and the potential risks that come with a night out. So this all sounds fairly positive and exciting, this idea that these nights out could be potential spaces for female empowerment, or for women to kind of rewrite or challenge ideas about femininity. However, as Kovac and Trussell argue, young women's engagement with the nighttime economy is a complex and contradictory issue that demands further investigation. And we know that in recent years, research into the nighttime economy says that actually there are a number of tensions that women have to negotiate and grapple with in nightlife spaces. So young women are likely to experience anxieties relating to things like alcohol consumption, the way in which they present the body, and the way in which they relate to others. So on the one hand, we could argue that the nighttime economy has these opportunities for liberation and freedom, but on the other, we can understand the nighttime economy as a highly regulated space where there's particular expectations around dress, around consumption, and actually where Atkinson and Sumnall have gone so far as to say that these illusions of agency and empowerment may actually mask entrenched gender inequalities that mean that women still experience significant constraint in the nighttime economy. We also know, thinking certainly about the mainstream nighttime economy, and I should say this was the focus of my own work, that in the mainstream nighttime economy, we often see expectations about particular sexualized patterns of interaction, and these are normalized and perhaps magnified as well. So research suggesting that heterosexualized patterns of conduct are normalized, encouraged, and expected, and that women can experience unwanted attention, harassment, and aggression in mainstream nightlife spaces. So what we also know is that women are expected to engage in a range of safekeeping practices in the nighttime economy, and indeed more widely, as a part of what it even means to be feminine in the first place. So I'm taking gender here as something that we do rather than something that we are. If we think about the performative nature of our gender, then we're required to constantly repeat various practices, behaviors, and interactions that allow our bodies to be successfully read as masculine or feminine. So to recognize gender as performative is to think about some of the ways in which women and girls are expected to act out their genders in particular ways, and to perform the gender assigned to their biological body through incorporating femininity into their identities and practices. So in this way, certain dispositions, behaviors, and practices become seen as the most appropriate or the most expected ways of doing femininity in the first place. And these are very much traditionally bound up with ideas of risk management and safekeeping. So the idea that to be feminine is to be risk averse, to manage risk, to work to keep the self safe. And any failure to do so is seen as a failing of what it means to be feminine in the first place. So moving on to think a little bit about my own work. So the Girls Night Out project, it feels like many years ago now, it wasn't that long ago, but back doing my PhD in Newcastle in the northeast of England, I was interested in speaking to young women about the ways in which they embody, challenge, and negotiate feminine identities and femininity, specifically on a girls' night out, so a night out with female friends. We know that previous research on the nighttime economy has tended to focus on nights out more generally, on recreational drug use, or positioning, going out as a kind of subcultural practice. So I was particularly interested in, what happens in the mainstream, what happens in these particular girls' night out, these particular modes of engagement in mainstream spaces. And particularly, I spoke to my participants around themes of alcohol consumption, around dress, and around risk management. I undertook 26 in-depth semi-structured interviews. There was quite a bit of diversity in terms of class and in terms of sexuality with my participants, less so in terms of race and ethnicity, which might in part reflect the demographics of the city of Newcastle as well. But what I was interested in is understanding the ways in which women talked and conceptualized, the girls' night out. If we can think about clubbing as a performed and socially constructed activity, I was interested in how women negotiated ideas of appropriate femininity on a girls' night out through what they wore, how they dressed, and how they acted. And I think that exploring the girls' night out as a discrete phenomenon gave me a good insight into some of the wider ways in which women today grapple with and negotiate feminine identities and aspects of pleasure and risk in their everyday lives. So to get on to the exciting stuff and talk a little bit about the findings, as I alluded to, I'm going to start by thinking about the kinds of pleasures that came with embodying femininity in the context of the girls' night out. And then I'm going to talk about some of the challenges and difficulties that came with participation in the girls' night out. And through doing this, I'm really thinking about participation in the girls' night out as a site of tension and contradiction for young women, where they're expected to manage particular expectations around gender and femininity. So the first point to make really is in terms of, being careful not to underestimate the value that the girls' night out had for my participants, and the opportunities that a night out with female friends presented for bonding and for doing and performing friendship collectively. And what was particularly interesting in my data, and actually we've seen this a little bit in research elsewhere, is that particularly for my heterosexual participants, the girls' night out presented an opportunity to have time and space away from one's partner or away from domestic obligations and responsibilities. So Jessie, for example, said, "It's my way of trying to maintain the friends I've had since childhood." And then she goes on to say that if she doesn't go, she'll feel bad because she won't see her friends for a month because they'll be working full time or practically married. So I think, and then Sophia as well, who also identified as straight, says, you know, I've got a boyfriend, so I think it's very important that I have that time with the girls. And what's interesting here is that for the young women I spoke to, the girls' night out represented that opportunity to carve out space away from domestic responsibility and also away from the mundane realities of work, you know, particularly for those who worked what they saw as a kind of mundane 9 to 5. For the young mothers that I spoke to in the study in particular, this idea of the girls' night out as a space away from caring responsibilities and an opportunity to be silly, as one of the young mums said, and not have to be responsible. And the kind of language that was often used by my participants was around, you know, time with the girls or girl time or being girly. So in this way, we can already start to see the linkages between femininities and friendships here. This idea that going on a girls' night out was a way of doing girly or having girl time with your female friends. And I just wanted, I know we're thinking about the nights here, but if we can get away from thinking about the public space of the night, I think some of my findings about the domestic space and about getting ready were particularly interesting as well. And I think potentially quite unique to the girls' night out. So my participants talked about the real importance of getting ready in a group of female friends and pre-drinking, so drinking alcohol together before going out into the nighttime economy. And in a way, the participation in the kind of getting ready and drinking in domestic space created opportunities for intimacy, connection, and girl time before they progressed into the potentially chaotic, noisy, you know, risky nighttime economy itself. So one of my participants, Jade, I should have said I'm using pseudonyms for all my participants. So Jade described getting ready as our own little private party. And the role of alcohol was really important and significant here as well. So Gail here talks about the idea of going out with female friends and drinking together. And the bottle of wine here seems to take on some symbolism, this idea of here's the bottle of wine, now let's sit and chat about our lives. And interesting in terms of thinking about the ways in which sharing a bottle of wine, for example, might be thought of as a more feminine drink choice. And Zoe goes on to say, I love getting ready. It's one of my favorite bits of the night. And other participants also said, sometimes going out is an afterthought, and the most important part of the night is getting ready together. So Zoe says, you know, the girls don't spend loads of time just as the girls. It's nice to have proper girly time, girls together doing girly stuff. And I could probably spend ages dissecting this interesting idea here of stupid girly stuff and the way in which she's simultaneously, you know, celebrating girliness and girly stuff, but kind of denigrating it or, you know, talking negatively about it as well. But I think, again, what's interesting here is the ways in which the girls' night out might be quite specific in terms of that opportunity to pre-drink and get ready together in domestic space. Once progressing into the nighttime economy itself, drinking and dress also presented opportunities to do femininity or to embody femininity. And Megan, for example, talks about feeling nice with a glass of white wine. She goes on to talk about the way it looks, the way that it feels elegant. Whereas Ali, talking more about appearance, says that she likes being a girl, wearing heels and dresses and showing off that that's who she is. So interestingly, there was this kind of collective performance of femininity through drinking quite often. So sharing the bottle of wine or buying a round of cocktails as a way to do femininity together. And with the getting ready as well, you know, again, perhaps through selecting outfits at home or doing hair and makeup together, this kind of collective performance of femininity. So it's important to note that these could be really pleasurable for young women. There was lots of talk of the pleasures and the joys of getting ready with girlfriends, spending time together, you know, embracing and performing femininity in this way. However, there was also an element of policing around this and an expectation that women would embody femininity in particular ways. And it wasn't always experienced as positive. So some participants talked about being sent back upstairs to change their outfit or being, you know, forced into a dress when they didn't want to wear a dress. Or interestingly, of drinking wine with the girls when actually they didn't want to drink wine. So Ali, who you see on the slides here, she talked about being a cider drinker. She would much prefer to drink cider, but when she was out with the girls, she felt that she had to buy into this collective feminine identity and she had to share a bottle of wine or have a glass of wine with her female friends. So there was some policing that also occurred around doing femininity in these spaces. The second theme that I wanted to touch on then was this idea that actually, as much as this could be pleasurable and positive, there was also this idea that one should not overstep the mark or go too far in terms of femininity. And whilst women celebrated participation in the nighttime economy, they also positioned themselves and other women as simultaneously vulnerable in the nighttime economy, so they could be victims of unwanted attention, harassment, drink spiking, yet at the same time as being vulnerable, also entirely responsible for your own safety. So clear links here to this idea that to be feminine is to be risk averse. And certainly my participants talked about strategies such as covering drinks to protect from spiking, never walking home alone. And actually their discussions of risk and managing risk were threaded through all the conversations that we had about the nighttime economy. And they recognize that there are these tensions between being carefree and being careful. So Naomi says, you know, you don't want to think about risk. You want it to be this kind of getaway, relaxing time. You don't want to think that there's risks behind it. But participants recognize that you cannot simply ignore those risks, and that actually much of their engagement with the nighttime economy is informed by their understandings of risk. So gendered safekeeping strategies, of which there were many, often centered around ideas about control and around visibility. So particularly control in terms of managing one's alcohol consumption was very prominent. So as Claire says here, you know, as soon as I start to feel like I'm losing control, I would stop drinking. So very much the idea that part of keeping the self safe was limiting consumption, and also control in terms of control of the body. So in terms of drinking too much, maybe vomiting or urinating in the street, this was seen as a line that was not to be crossed, a line to cross over into being unfeminine or unladylike, as well as being risky. So it was very much about maintaining control of the body and of consumption, which again links into ideas of femininity, you know, the expectation to be a controlled body. But visibility was interesting too. So my participants talked about wanting to dress up and wanting to look girly and make an effort and present the body in particular ways, but that this had to be balanced with a risk of overstepping the mark and going too far. So they argued that women should be able to wear what they want, but that actually in reality, you had to keep certain parts of yourself covered up. You had to make sure that you didn't dress in ways that were seen as revealing or promiscuous or provocative. And they often talked in these kind of veiled terms about this idea of unwanted attention as the risk, you know, what you would experience if you didn't dress in particular ways. So whilst there was an expectation to dress up and make an effort, participants talked about this idea of dulling it down in terms of dress, as one participant said. So, you know, not making sure that you didn't look too feminine or too girly, because that could be seen as inviting unwanted attention or giving the wrong idea to someone. And I think what's really interesting, just to kind of finish with a really nice quote, or an interesting quote, I think, from Lydia, this idea of the tension is really captured here. So alongside all this talk of how important it is to, you know, see the girls' night out as this opportunity to do girly and be girly, Lydia goes on to say, you've got to be really careful you don't overstep the mark or be too much of a girl, you know, getting a bit too drunk and flirtatious. You wouldn't want to leave them with the attitude that you're unreliable, you're untrustworthy, and stuff like that. So then I go on to say, you know, some good interview techniques here. What does that mean to be too much of a girl? And she says, I don't know, being flirtatious, getting what you want, talking to different men, you know, implying that you're happy to network, be very flirtatious, have a laugh, be surrounded by men. You've got to be careful. So here, what's really interesting is that behavior needs to be toned down as well. The idea of being too loud or too flirtatious or too feminine is seen as problematic. This idea of being too much of a girl. And it's interesting here that the risks might not just be risks to physical safety, but risks to reputation seem to be implied as well. So Lydia's kind of suggesting this idea that you might be seen as unreliable and untrustworthy, which links into wider research suggesting that conventional femininity places a real emphasis on ideas around trust and being suitable relationship material, for example. So here the idea of being too much of a girl is positioned as particularly problematic. So to kind of tie the main points together, we know that the mainstream nighttime economy is simultaneously positioned as a site of pleasure and danger. But we need to continue to ask how this is experienced in different ways according to, for example, gender, sexuality, age, and race. So the ways in which women, and the ways in which particularly women of colour or women who don't identify as heterosexual, I mean, I haven't had a chance to speak too much about this in the presentation itself, but the ways in which different groups of people and those who experience different kinds of embodied identities, they're obviously going to negotiate that pleasure-danger dichotomy in different ways and have different experiences. So the girls' night out, I've argued, is a key space where femininities must be performed, but they must be performed carefully in ways that present both pleasure and opportunity, arguably, through doing friendships, through escape, through the pleasures of dressing up or the pleasures of drinking, but also restraint through the pressure to keep the self safe, through risk management, and through the idea that one must not be too much of a girl. So notions of control and balance and visibility remain central to the ways in which appropriate femininities are embodied in these spaces. And it's important to note that much as we might wish to see the nighttime economy as a space of pleasure and a space of kind of the carefree pursuit of excitement, significant constraints continue to exist and certainly continued to shape the experiences of my participants on a girls' night out. So thank you, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you very much, Emily. If you agree, I think we can listen to Sarah's presentation and then do a Q&A for both.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talks. Okay, Sarah.
All right. Thank you, Emily, because I think it's great that you went first. So you see it correctly? Yes. So let me try myself and make sure that I don't speak more than I should. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to this seminar. What I'm presenting today is the work that I did for my dissertation in collaboration with 5 feminist organizations and with 24 self-identified women night shift workers in the Barcelona metropolitan area. So I work in this research as a PhD student, but also as a member of Col·lectiu.sis, which is a feminist urban planning cooperative based in Barcelona with 15 years of experience working in how to integrate a feminist, intersectional feminist perspective in urban planning. And we've worked internationally, not only locally in Catalonia and Spain, but also in other parts of the world, mostly in Latin America. So my work with Col·lectiu.sis led me to use feminist participatory action research as my methodology. I'm going to talk about the nighttime and the everyday, every night life from an urban planning perspective and from a feminist perspective. So I'm very grateful that Emily went first and gave you a little bit of context about the literature about the nighttime economy. Taking a look at the literature from an urban planning perspective and from a feminist perspective, we see that historically the role of planning in relation to the nocturnal sphere has been to regulate and control who has the right to the night city. In the last 20 years, night planning policies have responded to a neoliberal model of city-centered economic revitalization, through a neoliberal model of city-centered economic revitalization through leisure and alcohol consumption. And I think the study of Emily shows really that. However, urban planning has generally ignored the everyday life of those people who use the city at night on a regular basis to develop employment activities and unpaid care and reproductive work as well. At the same time, often planning the night lacks a gender and intersectional perspective. Nighttime planning interventions have privileged the able bodies of white young adult men, but continue excluding the bodies of women, particularly low-income women, women of color, migrant women, as well as transgender people and not white men. As a response to the exclusion of women in this field of planning, I use feminist urban planning as a body of literature to analyze the night from an intersectional feminist perspective. Feminist urban planning regarding the night has focused on women's restricted mobility and access to the city at night due to the fear of sexual violence. On the other hand, mobility studies in European cities show that women have a more sustainable, complex, and diverse mobility than men, and usually move by foot or public transportation. But women's sustainable mobility often paralyzed at night because of fear of sexual violence. One of the contributions of this dissertation to the literature is that we move away from analyzing women's fear as an individual issue towards a collective strategy of women's taking action by reclaiming spaces and demanding responses policies through the feminist action research that we conducted. So the dissertation had two research questions to follow this goal. And the first one looks at the impact of urban planning practices in women night shift workers' life at different scales, from homes, neighborhoods, workplaces, to the city and the region. This question looks at those aspects related to mobility, to the design of public spaces, and the perception of safety, as well as the impacts of night work has in women's health, family, and social relationships, and also in the working environment. And the second question explores how feminist participatory action research can promote gender transformative urban planning regarding the night use of the city. So the goal, it was not analyzing an issue, but also propose work towards transformation. I use feminist participatory action research as a methodology to work toward a transformative action with women night shift workers as the core researchers. The goal in general of participatory action research is to foster collective ownership and more horizontal relationship in research, where participants become the co-researchers involved in all the stages of the analysis of the reality, from defining the questions, choosing the methods, analyzing data, developing the action plans, and also proposing planning solutions. Feminist participatory action research entails also a deep ethical reflection about the political act of conducting research. And in that sense, I use a relational and decolonizing ethics approach, where I reflect about the meaning of doing homework instead of fieldwork. On one hand, I use the concept of homework to refer that I decided to conduct research in my home, because it is where I felt confident, knowing the context, the culture, and where I have the networks through the feminist organizations. And second, for me, doing homework, it was a reflection in terms of what implications, what are the implications of the research in the whole process. I use reflexivity, accountability, and reciprocity to be careful about any decision we made and any decision I made as the main researcher and with the co-researchers. I apply ethics of care also, placing women's needs at the center, providing also compensation to all the co-researchers and also food in all the activities. And one part of the ethics of care was also being very careful about flexibility, being flexible and comfortable with messiness, with changes, with times, and with workshop agendas. And of course, part of this relational decolonizing ethics was to work towards collective ownership and collective authorship of this work. Feminist participatory action research goes beyond analyzing an issue, and it's aimed to work towards transformation, as I said, and action. And in order to achieve that, the project has been structured in 4 phases. And what I'm going to present is the results of this project embedding each of the phases of the project. So first of all, let me talk a little bit more about the team. This project has entailed the participation of women from 5 organizations that provide services or work with women night shift workers, and also the participation of 24 women co-researchers who work at nights. Co-researchers are between 25 and 60 years old, work in different sectors and places, from cleaning and medical staff at one hospital, cleaning at the airport, street cleaning in Barcelona, elder care in different cities of the metropolitan area, a local police, social emergency workers in Barcelona, and also sex workers in different locations. Women also live in 12 different municipalities and work in 9 different locations. They have been working at night between 1 and 20 years. And 13 of the 24 women are heads of household. They live alone and live with dependent parents, or they are single mothers. And 3 of them are migrant women from Latin America. So it's not a community that was created. It's a community that it's located in different areas of the metropolitan area. So in phase one, titled Fostering Collective Ownership, we created, that was the goal, trying to make a collective ownership of these projects. So we created an advisory group with representation of the 5 organizations involved. And the group was key to provide institutional support, but also make sure that the project responded to women's needs. And also it was very important to give visibility and dissemination to the project. The advisory group provided contact for 24 women with whom I contacted individually, and we did individual dialogues to discuss the different activities, the availabilities of women, the opportunities, and mutual expectations. After these dialogues, all women, all 24 involved in the individual dialogues, accepted to participate and were engaged in at least one of the phases of the project. Due to their availabilities and geographical location, the 24 women work in 4 separate groups. And in order to foster collective ownership in this phase, this phase one, what the first activity that we did in each of the group was to create a collective ethics and safety protocols to define the ownership and authorship of the project, and also to talk about how to minimize the risk of co-researchers, how to work towards breaking power differential, create a trust and respectful environment, and also thinking about how to disseminate the results. Phase 2 was describing and analyzing the everyday life. And in this phase is where we conducted the data gathering analysis through individual and group activities. The first group activity was to describe the everyday and everyday life network, where each woman share with each other the activities that they do on a regular basis and analyze the challenge and they encounter on a daily and nightly basis because of their network. The second activity was individually and consisted in accompanying each of the women on their commuting route. Most women wanted to show the commuting route after work between 5 and 8 in the morning, which was the most problematic time for them. I accompanied them in whatever mode of transportation they use, walking, cycling, taking a bus, the subway or the train, driving a motorcycle or of a car. And we video recorded all the routes with a GoPro camera that each woman carried, but also with a fixed camera, and we also took pictures. Through this activity, we collected a lot of qualitative data on mobility at different scales, from the neighborhood to the metropolitan scale. And that's a good contribution, to a positive contribution, because a lot of mobility studies are mostly based in quantitative data. So we video recorded also these activities because, as you will see, one of the products to show the results that women decided to use was collective videos. After that, after the individual exploratory commuting routes, we gathered together again to work together in developing individual neighborhood and collective mobility maps. And the last group activity of data gathering was body mapping. Once we have created a trust environment, the last data gathering activity was body mapping to analyze how night work impacts women's bodies in terms of health and well-being, but also how fear and mobility in the city is experienced in women's bodies. After data gathering, I collected all the data, we transcribed it, and then we went back on each group to collectively analyze based in the transcripts what were the results, and also to start working together collectively as a group in drafting recommendations. Since the beginning of the project, as I said, women expressed a desire to communicate the results through video, and we use participatory video as a dissemination tool. So when we were analyzing data, we also organized a script workshop to collectively design what story they wanted to explain. We wanted to explain. And in this script workshop was the first time that the women from the 4 groups met for the first time and met with each other. So this workshop was also eye-opening, because through the process of what we thought of working on doing this script for the videos, it worked absolutely as a way to also analyze the data. Women described it, they choose the topics that they wanted to cover, how they wanted to show them. And through that, women started to define the categories of analysis that we later use in the collective analysis process. Women also decided in this meeting that they want to record individual testimonies to complement the previous recording in order to show the collective commonalities, but also to show the individual particularities. So the results of this dissertation can be classified in three main themes. First, the effects of the night work on women's everyday life in terms of health, well-being, family, and social relations, and gender discrimination in the workplace. Through body mapping, this research demonstrates that women embody inequalities at work, at home, and in the city that are exacerbated for working at night. Women work at night for economic reasons, but also to be able to combine paid work with their domestic and care responsibilities. And doing this under the conditions of night work means also sacrificing hours of rest and sleep, as well as family and social time. In consequence, women night shift workers face physical and mental health issues, from sleep and digestive disorders to mood disorders, depression, and anxiety. They also face isolation from their social networks and feel a lack of family and social understanding regarding the meaning of night work. Sex workers in particular are specifically impacted by the precarious conditions they live, unpredictable income, health issues, and exposure to violence for the type of work they do. Second, we have been able to gather rich and contextual qualitative data on different areas of urban planning that often have been informed by quantitative and androcentric analysis. Women night shift workers have detailed knowledge about how the transportation system works. We have to think that most of them live in close geographical distance from where they work, between 10 and 20 minutes driving, but it takes them between an hour and a half to commute back home on public transportation at 5 or 6 in the morning. Therefore, this research expands day mobility studies and reveals that women at night, in particular with working class, sex worker, and migrant women, also have sustainable mobility patterns because most of them move on public transportation and food. But as previous studies have documented, fear of sexual violence limits their mobility after that. Only 7 of the 24 drive, and they are mostly white and middle class women. The rest of women use public transportation, walk, or bike. Also, women explain how fear is part of their nightly commutes and examine the different reasons related with the physical and social configuration of a space at night. They point out the design of mobility infrastructures. They report the astonishing case of an underground tunnel, for example, next to the hospital, where sexual assault has already happened for years, but institutions have not provided any solution. They also share the sexual harassment they live in the public transportation and street when they leave work at 5 or 6 in the morning, above all on Fridays and Saturday nights when they commute with men who come out from the clubs and bars. But we also highlight the sexual harassment and violence against those women who work in the streets, like sex workers and street cleaners, who work on the low-value occupations and are socially perceived as objects and bodies that can be abused in the public sphere. Finally, the third set of the results is regarding research question 2, about how feminist participatory action research can contribute to feminist transformative urban planning. I illustrate how essential it is to incorporate grounded knowledge through feminist participatory action research in planning theory and practice in this dissertation. And I explain this by focusing in the last 2 phases of the research process. Phase 3, which is called sharing the knowledge, and phase 4, which is called working towards action. So in phase 3, when women decided that they wanted to disseminate the results at least in 2 ways, publishing a collective report and producing 3 participatory videos. So in 2017, we published a report that gathers the main results of the project under the title Nocturnas, the everyday life of women and shift workers in the Barcelona metropolitan area. The report is of collective ownership to acknowledge the work of all the women who have participated, and is available in 3 languages, Catalan, Spanish, and English. And as you see how the authors appear here, they appear in no order. So we have a beautiful designer and illustrator that accompany this publication, and they help us to kind of eliminate this hierarchy between authors in this kind of first page using a constellation of stars. The second result, the second way to disseminate the results, was the production of 3 participatory videos, which have been subtitled in English. And the topics, there are 3 topics that cover these videos. One covers mobility and transportation and the perception of fear and safety strategies. Another one, the topic is how night work affects the health and also social well-being of women. And the third is about the importance of using participatory action research with different groups of women. So with all these materials, on March 31st, 2017, almost 4 years ago, my goodness, we publicly presented the reports and videos. And it was a collective presentation where co-researchers of each group, a member of the advisory group, the filmmaker who edited the videos, and myself presented in front of an audience of around 80 people the results of the project. Local media attended the presentation, and as a result, the project was showcased in different media formats. So as part of phase 4, I consider that the attention that we received from media has helped us to disseminate the project, but also it is part of working towards action. Different journalists wrote articles in mainstream media. Also, we appear in radio shows and TVs. And I'm confident to say that the media coverage has helped put women's night work in the policy agenda. I'll give you some examples. Another action and accomplishment of this project is related with the influence we might have had on local and regional planning policies. So for the dissertation, I also interviewed planners of different cities. In particular, the interview with mobility planners at the Metropolitan Area Agency was very engaging because they committed to develop one of the actions recommended through the project. A request a stop in the night bus service, something that is very common in Canada, but not here in Spain. So actually a year after, they implemented the night bus stop at night, and actually in the metropolitan area. And now the city of Barcelona is discussing if they expand this to all the night buses in the area. I also was interviewing the Catalan TV, the mainstream TV, and this also got an impact on the Catalan Railway Company. The director called us the day after the interview, and we met with them to conduct a safety audit from a feminist perspective in 4 stations. To finish, this research is a call to urban planning to include the analysis of the everyday life as a continuum, examining the city in its 24-hour cycle from an intersectional feminist perspective. This study also highlights that night shift work exacerbates gender discrimination at work and at home. The reproduction and systematization of women's work precariousness enforced by capitalist, patriarchal, colonial, and racist mandates is worse for women's night shift workers because they must simultaneously manage double and triple shifts, detrimental to their health and well-being. Also, this feminist participatory action research has promoted women's right to take action, moving beyond the analysis of the painful elements of social realities to the desire of change. So women night shift workers participating without hesitation and with the objective of sharing loud and clear what is their situation and what they want to change. Previous to this work, women night shift workers were a group who was invisible to policymakers and who was not previously organized because of the challenge night work entailed. But today, the group of nocturnas through this project has been able to gain public attention, challenge planning barriers, and build coalitions in demand of better conditions. This process was unexpectedly a success. This process also confirmed that feminist activism and radical planning practices can have an impact on policies and therefore can improve women's lives. And I'll finish with that. Thank you very much. Moltes gracias.